Hello. In this series, I want to teach you programming like you don't know anything about it. I want to consider that you, the person watching this video, are an absolute beginner and don't know anything about the word programming. The only thing you really need to make this series worthwhile is a computer and maybe a good internet connection. If we later need to add some things, I'll definitely let you know. So without wasting much time, let's get into it. We are going to start by considering what programming is. Yes, I know this series is about me teaching you Python, but in order for us to start, you need to first know what programming is really about. So what is programming? Well, computers were developed back in the 18s. They have evolved massively over the years, and seeing them now, you will think that they are really smart. In actual sense, the so-called smart devices we see around are not as smart as you might think. Think of them as dumb servants. Yes, they are there to serve us. For a computer to really do something, it needs to be instructed. It goes according to some set of rules set down for it. Programming is basically the act of giving computers the necessary instructions to perform a specific task. The person who gives these instructions can be referred to as a programmer, developer, or sometimes even a coder. Personally, I don't really give much attention to these titles, but as time goes, you get used to them. So basically, programmers give instructions to computers through the act of programming. That's cool, right? And that's what we are going to learn today. Now, the computers are nothing like us humans, at least not yet. They can't possibly just understand our verbal and non-verbal forms of communication. So obviously, if we have to give them instruction, we'll have to find, some kind of medium of communication between us and them. That's where programming languages come in, and Python is an example of that. Other programming languages include JavaScript, which is mostly shortened as JS. There is also C++, there is C#. Yes, I know the spelling is way different from how it is pronounced. There is C#, there is Java, there is C, there is R, and there are others. Mind you, Java is not the same as JavaScript. Now, I'd like us to have a touch on how these programming languages are classified. I'm not really going to talk much about this. That'll probably be another video on its own. But just for you to have a fair idea, I'm going to say something little about it. First form of classification that we could consider is high-level and low-level programming languages. Computers or machines in general only work with current and voltages. They are electronic devices, so they only deal with current and voltages. And these current and voltages are eventually thought of as ones and zeros. One representing a higher voltage and a zero representing a lower voltage. So technically, computers only understand ones and zeros. Now back to the classification. The low-level languages are those that are close to the ones and zeros in terms of syntax and understanding. And by syntax, I mean the manner in which the language is written. And based on what I have just said, you can easily guess what the high-level ones will be about. They are much closer to the human language. That's why most programmers use the high-level programming languages. And Python is a high-level programming language. So it's a very popular example of the programming languages that most of the developers use these days. Another form of classification that can be considered is whether the language is compiled or interpreted. When a language can be directly converted into the ones and zeros, it is said to be a compiled language. For an interpreted language, the interpreter, that is what really, makes the computer understand the code that you've written. That interpreter is able to interpret the whole code that you've written, but it does so one line at a time. Don't worry about this, we'll get to understand this as we write the Python language. I will explain it. Obviously, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. And don't worry if you don't fully get the basis of these classifications. It can be quite tricky to understand. With time, it will all make sense. Later in this series, we'll be looking at object-oriented programming. And when I say object-oriented programming, it is basically a way of incorporating the concepts and features of real-life things into programming. And Python is a typical example of an object-oriented programming language. So Python is both object-oriented and it's also an interpreted language. Okay, I think you've had enough of the introduction. So we've had some interaction, but who am I? Well, my name is Paul, popularly known as Trevenue44. I like to consider myself as the tech boy who wants to do everything. I started Python back in 2019, and no, the start wasn't that straightforward, but I was able to find my way through. Today I'm here to help you do the same. Feel free, call yourself a Python programmer, a Pythonista, or a Pythoneer even if you want, because that's who you are going to become after this series. Alright, we are done for this one. If you like this content and would like to support, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. If you want to become my friend, connect with me on Twitter. The handle is Trevenue44. And don't ask me about the 44. I'll see you in the next one.